Fire Emblem Birthright has a very strong argument for being the most balanced game in series history, but there's one unit that makes everyone forget that. It's well known that undeploying everyone besides Ryoma and Corrin and having them walk forward together while paired up is by far the easiest way to complete the game. His combat contributions are just that good. Or are they? Because if you know what you're doing, you can make the same thing happen with any other lead unit in the game. The big thing that enables this is Corrin's unique combination of supporting attributes. Corrin can effectively make any unit invincible if they're leveraged correctly. And if that wasn't enough, they can also easily solo the game by themselves if you want them to. So is Corrin actually the best unit in the game? Maybe. But when you're actually going through and trying to see all the content this game has to offer, you start to realize that no unit expands your options more than Azura. When she's in the hands of a skilled player, training objectives and map clears start happening way faster than you would have thought possible otherwise. So who is Fire Emblem Birthright's best unit? Septi, Blug, and I have talked about this game for dozens and dozens of hours. There are lots of things we've come to agree on, but we still don't agree on who to put at the #1 spot on the tier list. So today we've come together to go over all 3 of these units, and their cases for being the best in the game. So who do you think is the best in the game? And did this video make you change your mind on anything? Let us know in the comments below. Let's get started. So my choice for the best unit in the game is Azura.
My choice for the best unit of the game would be Corrin.
And I've gone with the very typical choice of Ryoma.
Now, there are several different things that we will value when it comes to rating units in this game. We have 4 of the big ones laid out right here, and they are turn count, applicability, reliability, and uniqueness. The thing that we want to evaluate with these characters is how good are they at getting you through the game. Can they accomplish tasks faster than other units? Because it's easier to say that a unit is better if they can clear maps in 5 turns rather than spending 5 turns killing every enemy and getting it done in 150 turns. Do they enable other units to make progress faster? So even if they aren't getting every single kill on the map, is there something about using them that makes it easier for you to move through maps faster? And finally, do they need investment to get going? Do they need to be fed 100 kills before they can start actually contributing to maps? Reyna is the unit that I have as our example for turn count because she flies. She has very high stats, meaning that it's very easy for her to kill anything in her path. And even if you don't want to do combat with Reyna, she can be used as a pair partner to move very far into basically anywhere you want to go into a map, switch to your other unit, and enable them to do their thing wherever they want.
So for a unit being applicable, the main things you want to consider: how many maps are they useful in? This is pretty straightforward. It's just how many maps in the main story of Birthright are they going to be good in, and how much are you going to want to have them in your party at the time that you're playing this map? Do they need resources that you might want to use on someone else? This would be heart seals, stat boosters, specific weapons, maybe forges, maybe even going into the next question, do they require specific teammates? Do they want a specific person's pair-up, like Rinka pair-up or Kaze pair-up? These are pair-ups that are very contested for, and how badly is the unit that you are evaluating going to need these very specific resources for?
Then we do also want to consider their reliability. Obviously, if a unit is unreliable and you have to reset a map, that's functionally adding more turns to your turn count. So we want to care about, like, how good are their base stats? Do they need good level ups in order to function, which is going to make the game inherently less reliable? How are their hit rates? Are they going to hit everything that they go for? Are they going to perform consistently in combat, which will make your player easy to replicate? And are they likely to die in normal use is a pretty serious problem, because either they're going to then be left behind dead and will not be able to contribute anymore, or you're going to have to reset, which is functionally adding more to your turn count. Either one is not ideal. And we've got Yukimura for the poster child for the reliability section. Obviously, his personal skill gives +5 hit to all allies, which makes him automatically worth deploying for that extra 5 hit. But then he's also got a completely ridiculous 29 skill base and uses daggers, which are the most accurate weapon in the game. So he has 100 hit in every combat he participates in.
And the last factor that we have to consider is uniqueness. Are they the best at doing something? For instance, Llewellyn over here is unique in that Birthright gives you very few units that are capable of doing rally strength. the only unit that has the fighter class line in their base class set is Shura, who comes at level 10 promoted and has to spend a Heart Seal to reclass into Berserker and gain 3 levels at a point in the game where it's very difficult to do that. So even though he's not part of the main cast, I value Llewellyn pretty highly just because he's a very available unit that can get very easy access to the skill Rally Strength, which will provide a very big benefit to the rest of your team, and is something that's basically no other units outside of other captured fighters and berserkers are capable of doing. Another thing we might want to consider is, can they compress multiple roles into a single slot? So if you have units that can have multiple rallies, have maybe auras that can mitigate damage or increase other units' damage, that can be very valuable, because rather than having multiple units doing these different things and having to deploy both of them to get these things done, you can just have one unit slot dedicated to these things and having your other deployment positions free for your other units to go into. Now, uniqueness is a very important part of viability in this game, because if no one else can do what they do, you're probably going to be deploying them more often than not if what they're doing is very useful. So when we're talking about this game and trying to rate units, there are a few other things we should consider. Now, if we were to play this game only on normal difficulty, basically all units would function the same. You push them into range of other units, they get all the kills, and their job is done. So in order to make sure that there's actually something worth discussing, we play on the highest difficulty because it provides the greatest obstacle for your characters to overcome, and the characters that are the best at overcoming these obstacles rise to the top. And we also play without abusing some of the game's more degenerate features, things like My Castle abuse. So it's possible to get things like infinite gold, any skill in the game for just a small amount of gold, getting entire units that are already endgame ready at the start of Chapter 7. These things are not really things we want to consider because they really break the balance of the game in a way that usually ends up making it less interesting. Because if every single unit can max out all their stats before you go into a single chapter with them, they really aren't different from playing on normal mode and killing everything instantly. We also play without grinding. No skirmish maps for the infinite source of experience and support points. We don't play with DLC, which can provide really, really broken class-changing seals and skills. We don't play with path bonuses or the bonus box, just because not every player will have access to them, especially after the loss of the Nintendo 3DS's online features.
And this is just a small baseline to establish the most limited format where differences between units become most apparent. Obviously, not every playthrough is going to have all of these restrictions, but these are the ones that make the most sense for discussing the relative strengths of units.
Alright, so with that out of the way, let's get into the most obvious choice for the best unit in the game, and that is going to be Ryoma.
Ryoma is pretty obviously ridiculous. His base stats are so completely insane that he is functional well into endgame with just those alone, and then that's combined with one of the best personal skills and the best personal weapon in the game. The big takeaway is it adds a ton of damage and a ton of bulk and a ton of crit. So his stats are so amazing that he is just the best combat unit that you can have pretty much any point, and he does all that with zero investment required. So he's a pretty obvious candidate for it just because the game is about combat and he is the best at combat. It's that simple.
The easiest way to complete the game is to just undeploy every other unit besides Corrin and Ryoma, have Ryoma walk forward in every map to kill everything, and you'll probably have a good time. You might die a few times if you aren't super investing in things like reliability and bulk, but it will probably require the least effort out of any way to clear the game. Now, we do consider more things than just the easiest way to complete the game, because there is a wide variety of different types of playthroughs that you might want to do in this game. Things like routing every single map and completing all the objectives, training everyone, seeing all the content in the game, which includes getting every single other unit married. So there are more things that you might want to do in this game that don't involve just Ryoma soloing it, and we do want to consider that in how we rate these units. Even with that said, Ryoma is going to be one of your most useful units, even when he's not solo in the game, just because his combat stats are that good.
Frequently, Birthright maps, if you're trying to complete them fully and quickly, will require you to spread out a decent distance. They're pretty wide open, large maps, which require you to route a lot of enemies. And so Ryoma can functionally just take a side of a map completely by himself and one pair-up partner and be just as competent as the entire rest of your army going the other direction. It doesn't matter what you're doing, having a unit with perfect combat stats is just always useful.
And even in runs where you are limiting your use of Ryoma, it is still very nice to deploy him every once in a while to have him as a nice crutch for combat to take out some of the more threatening enemies, even if you're trying to use him more conservatively. Because the EXP curve in Birthright is so drastic, a lot of your units may end up very underleveled compared to the enemies for a while, and the fact that Ryoma joins at kind of a perfect time to mitigate some of that leveling issue at promoted level 4, it definitely makes handling a lot more maps way more manageable than it otherwise would be.
Now, Ryoma is notable in that even in extremely unfair comparisons, like against Saizo here, this Saizo is a level 4 Master Ninja promoted at level 20, and by the time you get Ryoma, Saizo will definitely not have that much experience, so even in this extremely unfair comparison weighted way in Saizo's favor, giving him way more experience than he would have at this point, Ryoma still just looks better. He has a lead of HP by 5, 7 more attack, 1 more speed, not as much hit, but significantly more avoid, a good crit rate, and his defenses are barely lower than Saizo's, which is incredible.
It's basically impossible for a regular unit to compete with Ryoma in any category except maybe his durability, but his durability isn't bad. It's just that his other stats are so insane that they just can't be kept up with by any other unit.
Saizo is considered to be one of the best combat units in the game, and Ryoma just makes him look silly by comparison. It is not close.
And another thing to mention is that most units aren't going to have a weapon as strong as the Raijento is. A Brass Shuriken plus 3 is decently expensive, even though Brass Shurikens are still only 500 gold per. That's still a lot of Brass Shurikens you need to make in order to forge a plus 3, so it does add up very quickly, and that's not something that every playthrough is going to be able to afford, at least as soon as Ryoma gets recruited. So even with extreme favoritism, it's going to be extremely difficult for really any unit to compare.
This is Ryoma, as he joined in Chapter 14, with literally nothing applied to him. He hasn't even had his starting inventory changed, and he's still comparing favorably to a top-tier unit who has been given a million levels and an insane forge. It's ridiculous how little investment Ryoma takes to outclass even incredibly highly invested units.
So the game plan with Ryoma is very simple. You walk into range of enemies, they die. And that is not something you can say about most units, because his sword is unique in that it allows him to counterattack from both 1 and 2 range, so no matter who attacks him, even if it's an archer or a mage or a shuriken user, he will be able to counterattack, and his massive attack stats means he will probably kill them.
Yeah, his sword is pretty unique in that it's 11 might, but it gives plus 4 strength, so it's functionally 15 might. But uniquely, the other 1-2 range weapons, like scrolls and shurikens, tend to have extremely low might, whereas Ryoma gets to have 1-2 range and his full attack stat, which is something that other units just don't get.
And to put things even more in Ryoma's favor, Ryoma benefits a lot from basically every skill that he has access to in his natural class set. He has the skill Bushido as his personal skill, which is incredibly good. It grants plus 10 crit and plus 2 damage dealt along with minus 2 damage taken when he has a same or lower leveled unit as his pair partner or attack stats partner, which is really huge, one of the best skills in the game. But that's not all.
Yeah, his skill set just from the natural Swordmaster line is ridiculous. Duelist Blow doesn't really do anything, but Vantage is one of the best skills in the game, although it functions a little differently on Ryoma than a lot of units. While there are a lot of units in Birthright who wouldn't mind 3-shotting enemies with Vantage, Ryoma isn't 3-shotting anything. He is either 2-shotting or 1-shotting. He can frequently use Vantage as a way to kill a threatening enemy like a sorcerer before they even get a chance to hit him at all. And then that gets combined with the fact that he has Astra, 10 crit from Swordmaster, 10 crit from his personal, and another 10 crit from the Raijinto, which leads to a pretty solid chance that if he procs Vantage, he will just instantly kill the enemy before they can even hit him. Combining that with Guard Gauge, obviously, means that looking at his Avoid, his Guard Gauge, his Astra chance, his crit chance, there is a single-digit chance that any given enemy can actually hit on Ryoma. And then, of course, he has access to Swordfare and Life and Death, which are two of the largest damage-boosting skills in Birthright. So, yeah, his skill loadout is just completely ridiculous, and this is all from just Samurai.
In addition to the Swordmaster's Avoid stacking, you can also go the different routes of going into Master of Arms with the Heart Seal, and getting a higher defense stat, which can improve your reliability if you don't want to rely on chance. And you also get access to a really nice skill in Seal Strength, which allows Ryoma to strike first on his player phase to debuff an enemy's strength, and on the off chance that he doesn't kill, that enemy will probably not be dealing very good damage to Ryoma on the next enemy phase.
Not super applicable, because the chance of Ryoma leaving an enemy alive is pretty low, but there are cases where it can matter.
Yeah, not to mention the extra strength of Master of Arms compared to Swordmaster. Master of Arms is just physically stronger in both bulk and offenses. His offenses get even further boosted at level 15 when he gets Life and Death, where he deals plus 10 damage per hit, but he does take a huge hit to his bulk in return.
Bulk hit can be slightly managed, because if an enemy is using a green weapon, like a Berserker or an Adventurer, that have weapon triangle disadvantage against him, if he has reclassed back to Swordmaster, those will typically just have 0 hit, so the extra damage doesn't matter. Whereas enemies that would use red weapons, like sorcerers or heroes, can frequently be damage stacked to the point where he one-shots him, at which point the only enemies that can physically lay a hit on him are just lance users, bulky enemies like paladins or generals.
And then even if he does get hit, he can usually still survive 1 or 2 before he actually faces a chance of death. And that will normally put him into Vantage range, which can give him more chances to crit the enemy or proc Astra against the enemy or build some Guard Gauge before the enemy can actually get their killing attack in, which can increase his survivability even with that extra damage taken.
Being in Fates makes Ryoma just that much better, because here in Fates we have the Guard Gauge, which builds up every single time an attack is attempted on either side of battle, and it really helps with Ryoma's ability to always survive, because he always has an opportunity to build up Guard Gauge before an enemy hits him if he's striking first using Vantage or on player phase. He will more often than not be doubling his opponents and building 4 units of Guard Gauge every single time he attacks something, and this just provides extra insurance, doing 100% damage mitigation on any attacks that might hit him. It's really good.
The only problem is that between his crits frequently one-shotting and Astra killing an enemy in 3 or 4 hits, while his Guard Gauge is substantially faster than every other unit in the game, it is also very random. It's pretty much impossible to predict how much Guard Gauge he will have on a given turn, but the answer is still more than whatever a unit would have otherwise. So, overall, it's pretty much a net positive.
And Ryoma's base class is good, but his options can expand even more if he chooses to branch out of his Samurai class line, because he has access to some of the best friendship options in the game. The most important one being Cavalier from Silas. Now, Silas gives him access to the Paladin class, which gives him 8 movement. So if moving at a Swordmaster's pace around the map and killing everything wasn't good enough for you, in Paladin you have 2 more movements, which lets you move through maps even faster, killing things even faster, and reducing your turn counts even further, which can be extremely impactful.
Yeah, basically the only way that a unit could compete with him before was in either durability or movement, but Cavalier gives him a bulky mounted class to make it so that he can't be competed with even in those categories. He has 8 movement, he now kills everything. Elbow Room and Defender give him an additional 4 points of damage, which makes it that much easier for him to one-shot enemies like Sorcerers and Adventurers. And then Shelter is just the most powerful utility skill in the game.
And we mentioned earlier that Ryoma has a particularly bad matchup against the blue units, especially the lance-using generals. But if he chooses to marry Rinka and get access to the Oni Savage class for Blacksmith, Blacksmith is a class that lets him keep access to his sword, while also providing him the skill Lancebreaker at level 15, which grants him plus 50 hit and avoid against lances, which basically makes all of his bad matchups completely disappear. It is incredible.
Yeah, once Ryoma has Lancebreaker, he can't be hit by lances anymore. He can't be hit by axes and bows because of Weapon Triangle. And then Tome and Sword users are frail enough for him to one-shot, which means the only enemy types that could even remotely threaten him left are Dagger users that are incredibly rare as enemies in Birthright beyond Ryoma's join time. So he basically ends up having perfect matchups against every enemy left in the game.
Yeah, and most dagger units in Birthright are normally on healing duty anyways. Most other threatening enemies with daggers are going to come from the optional paralogs that you don't even really have to do. So by the time that he does get Lancebreaker, there's borderline nothing stopping him.
But Ryoma still isn't completely perfect, because he does suffer from a pretty big problem, which is his limited availability. He joins in Chapter 14, while some units are considered to be late joiners in this game when they join in Chapter 9, which is kinda crazy. Chapter 14 is a bit over halfway through the game, so he won't be soloing every part of the game, just the parts of the game that he's available for, and he isn't available for the entire game.
Yeah, his availability is a pretty real problem. He is one of the last units to join. The only people who join later than him are My Castle joiners and child units who have special recruitment conditions. And Shura, so he's very late into the game comparatively. Even though Chapter 14 of 27 doesn't sound too bad by normal FE standards, for Birthright it is pretty rough.
He's also not really that good at doing anything besides combat. He does get access to Shelter through Silas Friendship, which can allow him to push further forward and see more combat. But that's about it. He isn't really good at doing things like setting up kills for your growth units. He isn't good at providing things like rally support and other utility functions. He is just a unit that can kill things, and that is often one of the most valuable things to have, but it isn't what you want in every single scenario, especially in playthroughs where you want to raise a lot more units than just Ryoma.
Yeah, if you try to use Ryoma to actually feed units, you can run into a problem where Ryoma ends up being too strong, and then you have to actually engineer ways to make it so that Ryoma isn't actually as powerful as he really is, and make sure that he doesn't actually kill an enemy, which usually means you'll have to have him use a weaker Kodachi, Unforged, or Brass Katana. And even then, with a Brass Katana, he may end up killing anyways, especially if you're in the later game and are fighting the unpromoted enemies.
And if you send Ryoma out to do combat with half of every single map in the game, that leaves a lot less experience to go around with your other units. This isn't a problem in a lot of playthroughs, but sometimes when you're raising more than 10 combat units, the experience greed can become an issue for more challenge runs where you want to train a lot of units.
And then his late join time does also make it so that his support access is a little rough. He wants to friendship Silas or marry Rinka to obtain better classes than just Swordmaster, but because he joins in Chapter 14, and a normal speed platonic support takes 5 maps, and a normal speed marriage takes 7, that means he's not getting access to any other classes besides Swordmaster until Chapter 20, which is a little rough.
And one more thing to consider is that once you get into the very late game, enemies start having very real stats. They can start realistically 2-shotting or 3-shotting Ryoma, and this means that Ryoma will often face a chance of death if his guard gauge does not line up exactly perfectly, and it's really difficult to make his clears more reliable because there's always this looming crit chance, which will make him gain less guard gauge than he might otherwise want, which is not always ideal.
It's especially scary because if you don't go the route of getting Lancebreaker from marrying Rinka, then the later game really does like throwing a lot of lances at you, especially generals, which have a lot of bulk. Depending on how much you have invested into Ryoma, it can be difficult for him to actually even kill the, bulkier enemies with like lances, and then he's gonna probably face a small chance of death on enemy phase with them.
Now, this chance of death usually is not very high, but it always exists in the back of your mind, so he is not always going to be the most reliable source of damage that you have if you have other really good units trained.
Yeah, if Ryoma is facing like 2 attacks that need to kill him, and each one has like a 5% chance to connect, which is a pretty realistic possibility from him, then that is an under 1% chance for him to die, but that's still more of a chance of death than, say, a trained up Oni would have, who would just be facing 0 damage, and so wouldn't be at risk at all.
Now, Bloog's choice of the best character in the game is Corrin, so why don't you tell us a bit more about her?
Yeah, so Corrin is immediately very unique in the sense that Corrin is able to support every single character in the game. That's all Gen 1 characters and all Gen 2 characters. The only ones that they can't support are the capturable bosses. And that allows Corrin to get any class through friendship and get any class through marriage. And likewise, because Corrin gets to pick the talent that they have at the start of the game, Corrin gets to pass any class to any person in the entire game. The possibilities for things that you can do with Corrin are quite literally unlimited. The only thing that you can't do is like put her in Kitsune or something, unfortunately. The nice thing about Corrin being able to support every single character is her personal skill, Supportive, which grants hit plus 10 and plus 2 damage dealt and minus 2 damage taken when supporting that unit if they're at C support. It's not hard to get a C support with every unit in the game because it only takes 1 map to do a full C support, and not only that, Corrin does have access to the private quarters. Now, most people actually do ban the private quarters in their playthrough, but if you do play with the private quarters allowed, it makes Corrin's support gains a lot faster, and it's able to even allow her to max out all of her supports before even completing a single map, and that has a lot of value. But even if you don't do that, Corrin does have perfect availability, meaning that no matter what, Corrin will always be able to support with a unit at the earliest possible time. Corrin will also be able to gain the most amount of experience during the course of the game because she is required to be brought into every single map except for the 3 invasions. Another nice thing that she does get is she has Evasive Partner and Devoted Partner, which are Corrin exclusive personal skills that are attached to Jacob and Felicia. Evasive Partner gives 3 defense, 15 avoid to Corrin, and that is really broken, especially for the early game when most of your units are pretty untrained. That 3 defense and avoid are going to help Corrin's bulk a lot, and it's going to allow you to do things like push very far forward and have almost perfect reliability in the sense that Corrin will probably never die. And Devoted Partner is pretty much just as good and in some cases better because that grants Corrin plus 2 damage dealt and minus 2 damage taken. So Corrin is trading the plus 15 avoid and 1 point of damage reduction and adding it to her offense. So every attack now is, she basically gets a free tonic in strength, magic, defense, and res. Again, really helps with, reliability in being able to survive and being able to very aggressively push forward and take really large enemy phases. Another thing that does help with that is that Corrin gets exclusive access, almost exclusive access, to the Dragonstone. The Dragonstone is mostly best in the early game. because the later you get into the game, the more you're going to want to care about doubling and want to do more like damage output. But in the early game, the Dragonstone is so powerful that it is able to completely one-shot some enemies even if you don't have a magic boon, and it increases Corrin's bulk even further than it already would be with all these extra skills. Even with like Evasive Partner and Devoted Partner added, it gives +4 defense and +3 resistance, as well as 10 crit dodge, which makes it even easier to make big pushes in the early game, start one-shotting a lot of problematic enemies that your weaker early game Birthright units will struggle with a lot. And overall, it's just going to be a very easy time to get Corrin trained up and find a use for her, especially in the early game.
Yeah, the Dragonstone has often been compared to a Jagan. It allows Corrin to basically become unkillable and set up kills for any unit that might want extra experience in the early game. And in a game with a lot of units that you want to train up, having access to something like this is a very big boon, because a lot of playthroughs will end up raising some of the less powerful units just because they're fun training projects and you want to see all the content the game has to offer. And Corrin is a unit that is very good at enabling that.
And even if you don't want to be setting up kills, if you aren't interested in that, she's always just a magic tonic away from being able to one-shot whatever you put her up against with the Dragonstone. So it's an incredibly flexible tool.
So Corrin does have access to the best set of classes in the game, being basically all of them, including some that just are not available to basically any other units. The most important one being Dark Mage, which not a single unit you can recruit in Birthright has access to outside of the ones that you capture. And this is the best class that Corrin has for soloing the game. It gives magic, which is the best weapon type. It gives good reliability in the skill Heartseeker, along with a damage stacking Malefic Aura, and it also gives him access to swords, which make things easier for the final boss.
Yeah, a lot of the Birthright enemies are actually very low resistance, especially in the late game. There's a lot of fighters and knights and generals and berserkers and great knights, and that makes it very easy for really any magic unit to just stack a lot of damage and start just killing everything. And then there becomes the problem of bulk. You need to be able to survive the enemies if you're going to be taking a big enemy phase. But the nice thing about the Dark Mage class is that in Birthright, you get access to the Horse Spirit, and you get access to being able to forge them specifically. So 2 more damage from the Horse Spirit, so it goes from 4 to 6. And then it also gives +3 in skill, speed, defense, and resistance. And that will add on top of the already high bulk and already high skill, especially if Heartseeker is going to be applied of a Corrin that is in Dark Knight. Now, the skill itself of Dark Knight is kind of rough, but it's not too hard to fix Corrin's hit rates. Not only is there Heartseeker, but there's also the fact that you can choose the Boon and Bane for Corrin, and if you so please, you can choose to give Corrin, say, a skill or luck boon to boost their hit rates even further. But they honestly don't really even need that, because the extra skill added to the Horse Spirit along with, say, a tonic and a pair up or a meal is good enough to allow them to pick the much better magic boon, and that will allow them to almost always hit 1-round thresholds for pretty much any enemy for the entirety of the game. There really is no better class to go in. And even if you're worried about the strength, if you're picking a magic boon, if you're worried about the strength of Corrin for being able to use the Yato, Corrin's strength growth is still pretty decent. With a magic boon and a luck bane, a Corrin in Dark Knight will still have a 60% growth and a 55% growth in strength and magic respectively. Even though the magic will be slightly better, using the swords is still going to be a very real option for him.
Dark Knight's stats just all around are amazing. It has 1 less strength and 2 less defense than Oni Chieftain, and it combines that with letting Corrin keep Yato access and then also being an 8-move mounted class. It's just an amazing class.
Now, for those of you that play a lot more Conquest and Revelation, you might be confused that we don't have Wyvern Rider as by far the best class in the game, and Wyvern Rider does not actually match up as well against Birthright. It is notable for having the most applicable pair of bonuses that basically any other unit wants, especially once you consider both Wyvern Lord and Malignite. But Wyvern Rider does have flight, and there are a lot of bows if you want to go into late game Birthright, and if you're going to solo the game with the units, a bow weakness is not really something you want to have. But it does still provide access to some of the best skills in the game in Strength +2, Lunge, and Rally Defense for really pushing forward and supporting your other units in different ways.
And Wyvern Rider does also, later on in the game, if you go into Malignite, you do get a damage stacking skill in Trample, which is +5 damage to all unmounted enemies. And there aren't a whole lot of mounted enemies in late game Birthright. There are a decent amount, but that's also mixed in with it, a lot of foot units. There's a lot of heroes and berserkers and generals that Corrin can still fight with Trample and have it still be applicable. That said, having a bow weakness is extremely intimidating for a lot of combat units in late game Birthright, mainly because it kind of starts at like chapter 21. Outlaws, adventurers, and bow knights are going to be abundant in a lot of maps, and it's going to be very difficult for a lot of flyers to stay in the front lines and feel comfortable. They're always going to want, at the bare minimum, a pair up, because bows having more range than any other weapon in the game, it's a lot easier for bow units to dual strike with foot units too. So you have to be very careful of enemy ranges if you're actually going to be doing combat with a Wyvern. That said, there's a lot of things that Wyvern can do that other classes just don't really get, most specifically being Rally Defense. Rally Defense is one of the greatest rallies in all of Birthright. It's super rare, but it boosts naturally the defense of every unit within 2 tiles by 4, which is very important given the fact that a lot of units in Birthright don't actually have that great a bulk.
Yeah, Rally Defense, it goes a long way for the defense, but then Corrin's defensive para bonuses in Wyvern are also amazing. But yeah, because Flight is not super useful in the late game, it ends up being more harm than good a lot of the time. Because of the way enemy density works in Conquest and Revelation, the bow weakness on a flyer just doesn't matter in those games because you can always manipulate a guard gauge for a bow attack. But Birthright likes to place cubes of like 3 bow knights immediately adjacent to each other that it becomes impossible to just completely guard gauge your way through. So Flight ends up frequently being more of a downside than a help, but all of the other strengths of Wyvern just still make it an amazing class anyways.
Being in Wyvern is a really good way to enable other units to do their thing. Being an 8-movement flying class that allows your favoritism targets to get anywhere they want at the start of turn 1, being able to switch to them and have them benefit from either Wyvern Lord or Malignite's incredible pair bonuses in addition to supportive. It makes basically any unit able to keep up with the rest of the game.
And the nice thing about being in Wyvern is that no matter what you want Corrin to do, whether it be a combat unit, a utility unit, a para bot, maybe a rally bot, Corrin can do all of those things pretty decently in Wyvern Lord. Even if you don't want to stay in Wyvern Lord's skills are so versatile that it is not always a bad idea to just go in Wyvern Rider for 2-3 levels, get Lunge or Rally Defense or even Savage Blow.
Which, if you're going for this more utility-focused Corrin, that might be Cavalier as well. Cavalier is just amazing. It has Shelter, which is, because of Azura, the best utility skill in the game. It functionally allows Corrin to act as a dancer in addition to everything else that they're doing. 8 movement, it doesn't quite have as strong of a pair up as Wyvern Rider, but it's very close, and it lets Corrin keep the Yato for final boss killing. So it's another fantastic class option.
Even if you want to go up the Magic Corrin route, Cavalier is not your worst option because just like with how Sakura can do great things in Paladin, Corrin can do those things but even better. It's still not quite as good as Dark Mage, but it doesn't require Corrin to dedicate their entire talents to enabling a Corrin solo. They can get access to the class through supporting with Silas or Sophie, and have access to it in any normal playthrough.
Yeah, and the nice thing about having access to it through either Silas or Sophie is the fact that Corrin never has to marry in order to get Cavalier. For female Corrin, Silas would have to marry, but if you want Corrin to say marry someone else, then you can just pick whichever one is the same gender as your Corrin, and then you can get an A rank with them very quickly. The nice part about having Cavalier as an option is that it mashes very well with pretty much any build that you're doing, because every build would love Elbow Room, every combat build would love Elbow Room, every utility build would love Shelter. Even if you're doing like a bulk boosting skill where you like hyper focus like one stat, Defender is still a good option for that because it boosts your stat. And yeah, it's overall just a really nice all-around class that almost every unit would want to be in, especially Corrin.
And since Silas joined so early, it's actually pretty reasonable to have Sophie recruited pretty early as well, so Corrin gets Cavalier access pretty early on.
There is a pair of other class sets that a lot of players find really appealing, and those are Fighter and Mercenary. And it's for one reason, and that is Soul. Now, Soul takes a pretty good unit and makes them really easy to solo the rest of the game with. It effectively acts as a RNG dependent way to extend your health bar beyond your max HP because it can allow you to heal mid-enemy phase, which can be really big in allowing you to just turn your brain off and walk forward and kill everything in your path without having to take into account all the damage calculations that you normally have to do. Because more often than not, if your unit can survive enough hits and deals enough damage, you will proc Soul and you will probably survive.
Yeah, and speaking of extending your HP bar, that can get even further boosted by having HP plus 5. If you combine that with getting an HP tonic, that's an extra 10 HP per map, which is kind of a lot, especially if you're using Soul to your fullest advantage, because that much larger of an HP bar will make it even harder for Corrin to die, and it will give Corrin even more chances to proc Soul. But even if you decide to go the Mercenary route and get Strong Riposte instead of HP plus 5, you can benefit from that as well, given the fact that you're dealing more damage to the enemies on enemy phase, which makes you heal more with Soul. And if you really want, you can get use Good Fortune for an extra luck percent chance to heal a little bit more every single player phase. It is a lot less reliable than Soul, but any bit of extra healing on these super HP tank builds are pretty nice. The only unfortunate thing is that in these classes, it's going to be hard to actually apply them in the later game once you start fighting more mixes of enemies with 1-2 range, because if you're going to stay in Hero, you aren't going to have access to much 1-2 range. At least 1-2 range that can actually proc Soul, because the 1-2 range sword and the 1-2 range axe in Birthright are the Kodachi and the Throwing Club. Those cannot crit or activate any proc skills at all ever, which can kind of hurt the build. Most cases when you're getting Soul, you are going to want to reclass into a class with 1-2 range like Omioji or Mechanist or Master Ninja, pretty much anything that could use tomes or daggers.
And notably, these classes, Fighter and Mercenary, do come with other promoted classes besides Hero in Berserker and Bow Knight, both of which provide a unique Nohrian rally in Rally Strength or Rally Skill, which are really hard to get otherwise besides through Corrin. And so either Corrin's spouse can take that class and take on the rally bot role, or Corrin can pass Soul and Strong Riposte for HP plus 5 to their spouse, and then start rallying for them with a unique rally that you would otherwise have to capture for.
And notably, Corrin has a kid, so every time that Corrin gets married in a run, you will be able to recruit Kana, and if you don't want to do either of those things, if you don't want to give Corrin the rally bot role or their spouse the rally bot role, you can pass it down to Kana always. And you can even further extend that if you're female Corrin, because if you're female Corrin, you have to marry a male unit. And most male units in the game, there's some exceptions, but most also have a child. If you don't want to do it with Kana, if you don't want to do it with Corrin, if you don't want to do it with Corrin's spouse, then you can do it with Corrin's spouse's child. So there's a lot of options that Corrin has when being able to actually pass down the bonuses that they get from their talent class to other units. There's a lot of possibilities in that department.
Now there's one more of the Nohrian classes that you might want to look into, and that is Outlaw. Outlaw is the most useful at helping you with turn counts just because it has one skill, and that skill is Movement +1. Movement +1 lets you go from having 8 move in Paladin or Bow Knight to having 9 move. And if you want to add a movement pair up on top of that, that's 10 move. And if you add 2 boots on top of that, that is 12 move. So you can get pretty crazy numbers really quick once you have an Outlaw talent with movement +1 to propagate around.
Yeah, the nice part is that if you don't want to waste your talent on getting Outlaw, Corrin is still able to get it. Obviously, there is Anna, who you can recruit pretty early on, as early as chapter 7, I believe, if you're using the DLC. But if you are playing a run that bans the DLC, you can wait until you get Shura, and you can either friendship or marry Shura in order to do that and be able to have access to a different talent. Now, Shura is pretty late game, so if you are going to go this route, Corrin isn't actually going to have that much time to make the most use out of these skills. As long as you save a paralog, you can kind of mitigate that, but even still, it is going to be kind of annoying because Corrin also has to build the support as well. And that makes it pretty much the easiest option to use Outlaw as your Heartseal class. However, that isn't a totally bad thing because obviously movement +1, it does allow you to push forward very fast. Like Septi said earlier, Outlaw can promote into Bow Knight, which gives you access to rally skill. That is a very rare rally, a very important rally to have, especially if you are worried about needing to boost reliability of your clears. And then there's also things like Lucky 7. If you promote into Adventure at level 5, you get Lucky 7, and for the first 7 turns you get +20 hit and avoid, which is really significant. 7 turns doesn't sound like a lot for the hit and avoid boost, and for some maps it can not be, especially if you're doing a run where you're routing all the enemies and waiting out for every single reinforcement. But if you're just trying to get through the game, 7 turns is more than enough time to complete almost every single map, especially if you're doing something like a defeat boss mission or like a map that is just like super easy to clear out big clumps of enemies. A good example being Wolfskin Peak. Now, I'd be impressed if you got level 5 at Wolfskin Peak because that is chapter 15, but it is possible, and that map has a lot of avoid tiles. It has a lot of mountains and forts and a gate tile and forests, and that will make it so that a lot of your units will struggle to actually hit the enemies. But if you have a unit with Lucky 7, that's not a problem. Corrin could just go in and hit pretty much every enemy in the entire map for 7 turns, and obviously a level 5 Corrin at that point is super over leveled, so they will probably be one rounding every enemy as well. This is even more applicable into the later parts of the game if you want to use the more inaccurate weapons like say the axe splitter or the sword catcher, or even if you want to stay in adventure with the less accurate Yumis, it still helps out the hit cut that you're going to be getting from using those weapons, and it makes it borderline a non-issue. The last important thing that Outlaw like super gets is Pass. Pass is super late game, but it can allow you to do a lot of funny things Pass is level 15 in Adventure, and it allows you to completely ignore the enemies when moving through tiles, so you can just straight up go through them, which can allow for a lot of fun LTC setups if you're trying to go for turn count. The most notable examples of this is using Pass to get past a wall of enemies and then rescuing another unit to have them move further into the map. And you can even do something like rescue Azura to have Corrin go through enemies, rescue Azura, have Azura sing to Corrin, and then have Corrin move even further into enemy lines. The speed possibilities in terms of turn count are pretty good with this class.
Now, the Nohrian Classes are some of the best you have access to in Birthright, but there are a few Hoshidan Classes that you might want your Corrin to have as their talent. The first being Oni Savage. Now, this is probably the most versatile magic class that you can just give to any other unit that wants it, because it really min-maxes the stats that really matter, and those are defense and magic, along with having a very solid speed stat. Oni Savage is one of the easiest classes to use in Birthright because they are particularly good at walking forward, taking no damage from enemies, and having unlimited tries to deal damage and kill them. Their chance of success is going to be boosted with a Corrin pair-up in particular, because if Corrin passes this class to their partner, they will also probably be pairing up with them and giving supportive, which further boosts their hit rates by 10 whole points, which is a very big deal when you are dealing with hit rates as low as Oni Savages.
Yeah, and the nice thing about Corrin's pair-up is that it's very easy for Corrin to get into a class that is most optimal for their partner's pair-up. If you aren't gonna go with Corrin being the lead, then Corrin can pretty much build an important support quickly that is really good for their partner's pair-up, quickly friendship seal into that class, and pretty much stay as a backpack for the rest of the game and have their partner walk forward. And Corrin can also do kind of the opposite of that. If you want to, say, have Corrin marry Rinka, Corrin can then partner seal into Oni Savage. Corrin can be the lead unit, Rinka can be the backup unit, and then Rinka could, say, reclass into whatever Corrin's talent was for the optimal pair-up stats that you want, and have Corrin be the lead for that with pretty much the same effect, and most often the case, they will do it better than their spouse.
Now, when it comes to reliability, in addition to having good hit rates, which Oni Savage really does not, there's also the thing to consider, which is the chance of failure. And when you're an Oni Savage, the chance of failure is very often going to be 0% if you choose your matchups right, because if enemies deal 0 damage to you, yeah, you're just not going to ever have a chance of death.
And when you combine something like Corrin's access to Jacob's evasive partner pair-up, they're just one of the easiest Onis to get into that position of taking 0 damage from every enemy. Because Corrin's natural bulk is really good, and then she just has unique access to a +3 defense pair-up.
When it comes to enabling units to do more things in the late game, Ninja is a class that is pretty easy to recommend passing. Now, you probably will not get very much value of giving Corrin Ninja talent because there are a lot of other options to give Ninja to basically any units that you have in this game. So Corrin isn't being the exclusive provider of this class like she would be for a lot of the Nohrian classes. But access to one of the best classes in the game is an upside that you really can't ignore.
Yeah, the nice part about Ninja is that there are 4 units that give Ninja upon reaching S or A with Corrin, being Kaze, Saizo, Kagero, and Asuki. And especially in the case of Kaze, Kaze is required to get an A support with Corrin if you want him to survive longer than Chapter 15. So being able to have that required support just on hand, it makes for a really easy A support for male Corrin and a really easy S support for female Corrin if you want to go that route. But even if you are female Corrin and you don't want to marry Kaze, you still have the option of friendshipping Kagero. So female Corrin also does not have to marry in order to get access to Ninja, which is probably one of the most important classes to have as a carry. If you want to do a physical build Corrin, you are probably going to want to go into Ninja at some point towards the end, because 1-2 range is just that powerful. And the nice part about Corrin having access to this without needing to marry anyone is that Corrin can marry someone like Jacob or Felicia or like Rinka or someone for the better pair-up stats or access to the Corrin exclusive personal skills, and really abuse the fact that they can get multiple supports at once.
And notably, Master Ninja does allow Corrin to keep her access to swords, which is super useful for the final boss. Master Ninja's low strength and poor sword rank makes it not the best sword-using class for doing that, but it is still a sword-using class, which is important.
And speaking of classes that give shuriken access, Apothecary is another extremely underrated class because it gives access to two extremely high value skills, those being Quick Salve and Potent Potion, which boost the effectiveness of drinkable items, including healing items and tonics, and allows you to use them mid-map without sacrificing your action for a turn, which can really help you making offensive pushes while not sacrificing survivability. It is a gateway to Mechanist, which is one of the best physical classes in the game, and it does so while giving the superior unpromoted skills compared to ninjas, which really don't do very much.
Yeah, the very nice thing about Quick Salve and Potent Potion especially is that a lot of times when you're worried about a unit's survivability, it's not that they can't ever really survive an enemy phase, it's that it's going to be hard to get them out of their situation in player phase. However, if you have Potent Potion and Quick Salve, that isn't as much of a problem, because if a unit has a bad enemy phase and it leaves them in danger, they are still able to heal and take out an enemy on player phase, and that will allow them to much more comfortably push forward and be a lot more aggressive than you otherwise would allowed to be with a unit. And if you want to go this route, Apothecary, on top of Mechanist, also gives access to Merchant. Merchant gives Spendthrift, which is a player phase version of Life and Death, where it gives plus 10 damage dealt, minus 10 damage taken if they have a gold bar in their inventory. And that stacks on top of the skill Profiteer, where for the first 7 turns, any action that a unit takes has a luck percent chance of giving them a gold bar. So the amount of gold bars, especially if you have a luck boon Corrin, can be pretty bountiful. So having to worry about Spendthrift always being active is kind of a non-issue. That said, Mechanist is still much better, but there are a lot of merits to going Merchant, especially if you want to consider the bulk and offensive stats of the class that Corrin is in and the pair-up bonuses that Corrin gives, because the pair-up bonuses of Merchant are also very good.
Spendthrift doesn't usually seem that crazy because it's a player phase only skill, but on Corrin particularly, it's really nice because the attack threshold necessary to one-round the final boss is pretty huge, and Birthright does not give you a lot of brave weapons to hit it with. So Corrin with the Blazing Yato becomes the best answer a lot of the time, and Spendthrift is such a huge portion of the damage stack if you really want to one-round the final boss.
Speaking of being able to one-round the final boss, the last two classes that we're going to talk about are pretty much purely here for the ability to stack damage, and those are Samurai and Diviner. Samurai, of course, gives access to Life and Death, which is plus 10 damage dealt, along with giving Vantage, which allows you to hit your enemy before they can hit you, while Diviner is the more magical version of this, providing Magic plus 2 and Tome Fair, which can boost a magic unit's combat from being pitiful to being pretty respectable.
If you ask pretty much anyone that has played Fates, Samurai is by far one of the best classes in the game. I think most people won't call it the absolute best, but the fact that it gives you Vantage and Life and Death and even if you want Swordfare, which is pretty good on Corrin, especially if you're trying to reach 1-round thresholds for Garen with the Blazing Yato, it is very important to have these damage stacking skills and to have that extra reliability of surviving with Vantage. No Corrin is going to be upset about going into Samurai for one reason or another. Every Corrin pretty much is going to at least appreciate having Vantage and at least appreciate having that extra damage stacking. Unless you're doing, like, say, Strategist Corrin, max support. But if you are doing max support Corrin, you can go into Diviner and have, staves and stuff on top of the extra magic damage stacking. Diviner can stack with having a talent for, Dark Knight, or pretty much just Dark Knight actually. It's able to stack with Malefic Aura from the Dark Knight talent. You're able to dip into this class to get Magic +2 and Tome Fair and then go back into Dark Knight if you wish, or you can stay in Diviner or Omioji or even Priestess to be more of a support unit. And pretty much no matter which route you go with Corrin, it's not going to be incorrect to go into these classes.
Yeah, Samurai does particularly excel at that final boss kill, like we mentioned. If you have half strength, swords on a Hoshido Noble Corrin who has gone and learned Life and Death and Swordfare, all she needs to kill Blight Dragon Garen from that point is a tonic and Hinoka's Aura. It is by far the easiest way of taking down the final boss in pretty much all 3 routes of Fates is just to have Swordmaster Corrin. It's really nice.
Yeah, and the nice thing about Samurai is the fact that Corrin has not only, perfect availability again, so is able to immediately start building support with all 4 of these units that can give her Samurai, but if you want to wait until Ryoma joins, Corrin has a fast support. Say if you have a male Corrin, or even a female Corrin if you're willing to waste your marriage on this, you can stick Corrin onto Ryoma, have Ryoma abuse supportive, and Corrin can leech off of the support gains to go into Swordmaster eventually and start building towards Life and Death and Swordfare and all of that for the Garen kill, which is pretty nice.
There's pretty much nothing in this game that Corrin can't do. But one of their main problems is that it's really hard to make them do everything, and even if you spread out your class lineup to give Corrin the ability to do anything you might want, they probably aren't going to be doing all of it on any given turn. You really have to choose between having them be a combat carry or being a para partner or providing some other utility to your team.
Yeah, the most unfortunate part about Corrin is it kind of gives you a bit of decision paralysis on what Corrin should be doing, because the fact that there are so many options and the fact that you can't do all of them at the exact same time makes it so that no matter what you're doing with Corrin, you're probably going to have to make a sacrifice. If you want a combat Corrin, you're giving up pair-up utility. If you want a utility Corrin, you're giving up a combat carry. That can kind of like hurt a run in the sense of, oh, if I'm used to having a Corrin that's like doing this at this chapter, but my Corrin is like a utility unit now, I can't do the same enemy phasing that I normally do. It really makes you think about, okay, I have to tackle this in a different way now because my Corrin isn't as strong as they used to be, or my Corrin is too strong and my other units are falling behind. That is a very real problem that you can run into if you're using Corrin, especially if you're using them more liberally than your other units.
And what makes it worse with Corrin needing to make a decision is that you do really have to make that decision. You can't just coast in his or her base class like you can with a lot of units, because Nor Prince is such a terrible class beyond the early game. The Nor Prince into Hoshido Noble line provides no meaningful skills at all, and it's locked to 2 melee weapon types, and all it has for any support function is E-rank rods. So it's just doing absolutely nothing for Corrin. He or she needs to reclass out of the class, so you do need to make up your mind about what you're going to do with Corrin very quickly.
I will say there is one very extreme edge case where Hoshido Noble is a good option, and It's because it's one of the few classes in the game that provides both a defense and luck pair-up bonus. There are a few extreme edge cases where that can be extremely impactful.
It is also the highest strength sword-wielding class, gets A rank swords, so its total sword damage is the best in the game, but both of those are pretty niche cases that aren't going to show up very often. And if you do want to take advantage of those things, you probably still needed to plan it out in advance.
And the unfortunate thing about Corrin pretty much needing to reclass to do anything super meaningful is the fact that class change items are very limited. In Birthright, you only get 4 heart seals, which is the main problem that Birthright runs run into, because one of those heart seals are normally going to Corrin to put them in Corrin's talent. And that can be a problem if multiple of your units want to be able to reclass. But the nice thing is that Corrin can use their wide variety of friendships to get access to a class that is more favorable without needing to spend a heart seal. But even then, you are going to have to spend money on the seals, and money can get tight, especially if you're doing something like a full recruitment playthrough where you're trying to like train a lot of people at once, because that is going to be a lot of money that you're going to need to spend on, you know, more weapons for more units and more seals for more units. Eventually it gets very hard, even post chapter 20 where you can start buying seals. You're gonna have to start making some real budgeting decisions, especially if you do like a long paralog chain and you're not doing the story chapters to get extra money for more seals.
And even once Corrin gets into the class they want to be in, they do suffer from the issue of they probably don't have any weapon rank in any of the relevant weapons that they can use. Building up weapon rank isn't very easy because it requires 20 to get to D rank and an extra 30 on top of that to get to C rank. Some of the more desirable weapons in the game do come at D and C rank, especially if you want to use like a Bolt Maginata. That requires a lot of weapon grinding on Corrin.
Yeah, if Corrin is going into a class that doesn't have swords, they are not going to have any rank at all in the class that they're going into, because Dragonstones are locked to Hoshido Noble and Nor Prince and Princess. So this is especially a problem if you are using the Dragonstone a lot in the early game, because all of that weapon rank that you're building on the Dragonstone, you're eventually going to lose everything. And the fact that you're using the Dragonstone more means you're not using swords, so your sword rank isn't going to be as built up, and it's going to be a lot more difficult even if Corrin is going into a sword class. And another important thing is that if you're not wanting to spend one of the 4 early game heart seals on Corrin, Corrin is going to need to build a support with a unit. And building a support with a unit can be annoying, because if you're doing, say, a full recruitment playthrough, not only does Corrin have to spend a lot of time reaching a support with Kaze to keep him alive, there's also a lot of units that are going to be wanting to not support with Corrin. Say Rinka, for example. Rinka, if you're going to be supporting someone with Rinka, it's probably going to be someone like Saizo or something, who would like the extra strength or bulk or something. That will make Corrin's options for support a lot more limited, even with the private quarters, if you are willing to do that, because it is RNG and it is pretty monotonous if you want to do private quarters abuse to build supports up quickly.
The end result is that no matter what you want to do with Corrin, you're always going to have to put a lot of work in to get that payoff, which is pretty unfortunate.
But in exchange, Corrin is the most flexible unit in the game, by far, being able to fill pretty much any role that you want to put them in and do it better than most other units. So, pretty good trade-off, but you do have to think about your choices. And speaking of choices, one of the more impactful choices that you're going to make regarding Corrin is their gender, because male Corrin and female Corrin both allow you to do different things. One of the most impactful ones is the fact that male Corrin causes Felicia to join in Chapter 6, while female Corrin allows Jacob to join in Chapter 6.
Yeah, so there's a lot of debate around Felicia versus Jacob, and it is a very real debate, because what they kind of do isn't really that mutual, especially if you try to do a lot with them, like try to reclass Jacob or Felicia, because Felicia is more magic based and Jacob is more strength based. And it also importantly gives Corrin a different pair up skill in the form of evasive or devoted partner. So you do have to make the decision on which one you think is going to be more important there. In most turn count related things, most people will tell you that Jacob is probably better because Jacob gets access to Cavalier early and is very, very fast, is able to move forwards and get a lot of map control in a short amount of time, which is something that Felicia struggles a lot more with. However, if you're wanting to have another unit that wants to do more healing or have a bit more magic damage in the early game, it is a real option to pick Felicia over Jacob because Felicia has way better healing, which can help the survivability of other units. Say you want to have Hana to have a big enemy phase on chapter 7, but you also want to have someone push forward. You can send Sakura with the unit that's pushing forward while Hana fights the stragglers in the back, and you can have two very good strong healers with a lot of magic to help out with that, which is something that Jacob kind of struggles a bit more on.
Felicia also notably has Demoiselle instead of Gentilhomme. There's a pretty significant portion of the game where Saizo is probably your best unit, and he only does benefit from Demoiselle. So there is also a difference between them in terms of those skills, which is going to matter depending on the composition of units you want to use.
But of course, if you want to raise a lot of the frailer female units, then Jacob's Gentilhomme skill is a lot better at enabling them to survive and start getting experience faster.
And even if you don't want to reclass either of them, you can make the decision based off of the fact that Jacob does deal more damage in the base class of Butler and Maid than Felicia. However, later on, if you train Felicia enough, Felicia can get access to a forgeable Flame Shuriken, which can have her damage output be way higher than Jacob's in that class. So it's really just what's more important in the early game, what's more important in the later game, which one do you value more?
And depending on what unit you want to give favoritism to by having Corrin marry them, male Corrin is going to be your only option for passing your talents to any female units other than Rajat, who can marry both male and female Corrin. If you want pretty much any female unit to become the big carry that does all the things, choosing male Corrin is pretty much a necessity if you want to do the Corrin favoritism route.
Yeah, and the unfortunate thing about that is that if you want a female unit to be a super hard carry like that, and you're trying to, let's say you really like Orochi, right? You want to marry Orochi and have Orochi be your best unit in the entire game. The best way to do that is obviously to marry Corrin. However, that locks you out of full recruitment because there's an uneven amount of male and female characters in the game because of Corrin. And since male Corrin has to marry a female, females aren't the ones with children in this game, you're not going to get two children out of marrying someone with male Corrin unless you marry Azura. So if you marry anyone other than Azura, you are just completely locked out of one child unit guaranteed.
So there's just a lot of decision making that needs to be made, even from Branch of Fate, about Corrin's gender, because it does have a massive impact on which units you can obtain and which units you can actually invest favoritism into, because Corrin is unable to give their talent to units of the same gender, besides Rajat.
For male Corrin, Corrin actually has another big decision-making process in the fact that he needs to marry Scarlet in order to get Wyvern Rider, which, you know, while we said it's not totally necessary to stay in Wyvern Rider because Wyvern flying isn't as good in the late game of Birthright, it still does provide very good skills, and it's still a very real class that you may want to consider going into. And you need to, for male Corrin, consider, okay, do I want to waste my marriage on this, or do I want to waste my talent on this? Because without one or the other, you're not getting in Wyvern at all.
And choosing male Corrin can also adjust how quickly you can get some other classes. For instance, getting Cavalier from Silas will always happen a lot faster than getting Cavalier from Sophie. just because Silas is available for more of the game than Sophie is. So male Corrin has the advantage there, while he has a disadvantage in getting into classes like Apothecary, because his only option for getting NA support with an Apothecary class is Yukimura, while female Corrin has the option to get NA support with Midori, which can happen a lot earlier if you don't want to spend your one marriage that you have over the course of the entire game on getting into Apothecary.
Though, speaking of Midori, one nice thing that male Corrin is able to do is for the required A support with Kaze, female Corrin doesn't actually benefit from that too much, nor does Kaze unless they are getting married to each other, because it's requiring them to waste a lot of time getting an unnecessary support when they could be supporting someone else that is much more desirable. Like Kaze would much rather be supporting with someone like Silas or maybe Rinka, and Corrin could probably be wanting to go with someone like, you know, Ryoma or Hana or someone like that. And the nice thing about being male Corrin for this required A support is the fact that this will unlock the ninja class line for Corrin. So if you are always like unsure of what talent you want to pick for Corrin or what class you want Corrin to go in, if you pick male Corrin, Corrin will always have the option of going into ninja if you decide to keep Kaze alive, which is probably one of the biggest boons that male Corrin has over female Corrin on top of the earlier Cavalier access.
So yeah, Corrin is just good at most things in the game, better than most of your units at those things. And if you plan your run correctly, they can become incredibly impactful. But the unit that I think is often more impactful over the course of an entire playthrough is going to be Azura, because Azura has unique access to one action in particular, probably one of the most important actions in the game, and that is Sing. It effectively allows her to trade her action and allow any unit of your choosing that is within range to get their action back after they act. And this can be one of the most powerful tools in any Fire Emblem game. It lets you do things like send someone even further forwards towards a boss that you want to kill on turn 1, which makes Azura essential in the single turn boss skips of the late game that you can do in Birthright. It allows Azura to allow units to make up for missing by allowing them to have another chance of hitting the enemy that they missed. And she also has a huge amount of flexibility in who she can dance, because this game has the pair-up system, which allows her to pair up and move basically anywhere that she wants on the map within range of any other unit. Which means that she can have the option to sing for basically any units on any turn, which can be incredible for allowing you to do things on multiple fronts in any given map. The ability to sing is one of the most valuable things that you have in any Fire Emblem game, and one of the best things about having Azura in Birthright is that she has full availability. Starting from Chapter 5, she is always available to be deployed in your party, and you're pretty much always going to want to be deploying her. There are situations where Corrin might not be one of your best units because their role is just going to be a pretty good pair partner, while Azura will completely change the way that you can play certain maps. It is kind of crazy. It allows for doing things like training growth units like Hayato and Mozu in a reasonable turn count. It allows you to improve the reliability of so many clears with the ability to re-roll a miss attack. You can do so much with the Sing action. It is one of the most high value actions that you can have in this game.
The unique thing about Azura being so available is in most Fire Emblem games, they usually make you wait for your dancer. Like in the most recent title, Engage, they make you wait till like chapter 15 in order to get your dance action. Meanwhile, Azura being able to sing for pretty much every single map in the game is extremely broken. Always having the action to move a unit further into the map, or re-roll an action, or train a unit by giving them a bunch of extra kills than they otherwise would be able to get, or just like getting them out of any bad situation. The fact that you get that for every map is almost unreal.
The combination of having perfect availability and the fact that Azura is able to sing multiple times per turn makes her probably the best dancer in the series. She can do basically anything, and the ability to dance multiple times per turn in every map is so ridiculous. You just get so many dances in throughout the course of the game, and every single one of them gets to be incredibly high impact.
And if you're wondering how she can get multiple dances in, it's thanks to the Shelter skill, a skill that is exclusive to Fates, and it interacts with Parip in a pretty unique way. If you shelter a unit, even if they have already acted, they become the pair partner of the unit that used Shelter. And this allows you to transfer them away using the action of another unit, and do their action again. So Azura can just have a second sing every turn, and if you want to shelter her again after another transfer, you can have a third sing, or if you're really crazy, a fourth sing. Things can get pretty out of hand pretty quickly, and it can allow you to make extreme pushes. If you look at the low turn count runs, they make extensive use of this mechanic, and it can go pretty crazy. The ability to sing multiple times per turn makes things easier for Azura when it comes to things like gaining experience, because her combat really isn't great, so she might want to get more of her experience through repeatedly singing on a given turn, and this makes it easy to do that, because you don't need enemies to get experience from if you can just sing 5 times in a turn and gain like half a level. It also allows her to gain support with shelter users a lot more quickly, because she can sing for them multiple times in a turn, which really accelerates support gain without having to dedicate her action to doing combat with them or something.
Yeah, and the faster experience gain does actually kind of matter for a little bit for Azura, as long as you're not doing the super like kind of degen grind Azura to level 10 in chapter 5 strat. If you don't do that, the faster experience gain is very nice with shelter singing, because it allows you to get faster access to Inspiring Song and Voice of Peace later on, which are two very powerful skills. Voice of Peace less so than Inspiring Song, but they are still both very good.
Inspiring Song allows Azura to make her sing action even better, granting +3 to skill, speed, and luck, which is crazy.
Yeah, if you aren't playing hugely for turn count, obviously it's important either way, but you will frequently find yourself ending a unit's turn just so that they can get Inspiring Song on their first action, because it is such a huge boost. 6 points of hit and 3 points of AS is just massive at every stage of the game.
In Fates, it's pretty easy to get a unit's stats to the point where they can do anything you want, and Azura's Inspiring Song is a big part of getting speed and hit to extremely high levels that really just wouldn't be possible if you didn't deploy Azura. She is pretty essential in the more advanced clears of a lot of maps, just because the ability to provide stats in a way that no other unit can gives her the unique utility on top of the unique ability to provide more actions. Azura's utility is really something that can never be replicated by any other unit, and that makes her an auto-deploy in basically every map in the game.
And the nice other aspect that Inspiring Song has is the stats that are given from Inspiring Song are +3, which is more than a tonic, so it actually saves you money if you want to really abuse this, because especially in the early game, your unit stats are going to matter a lot more, because you're going to be wondering like, okay, how can I quickly take out enemies without having anyone, die? And usually the answer to that is one round the enemy. And the easiest way to one round the enemy is to either one-shot them or two-shot them and double them. And a lot of units are able to do that decently easily. However, some of the more strengthy units may run into a speed problem, like Silas, for example. Silas does have a lot of strength, but sometimes he can struggle a bit with his speed, and Inspiring Song can help him get to that speed threshold without needing to spend money on a tonic or something.
And then the accuracy from it is also obviously amazing. If you can manage it, you want 100 hit on every attack. Obviously, it's not possible to have literally 100 hit on every attack, but if you do, if you want to get as close as possible, +6 hit on any unit on command for the entire turn is amazing. Hit is much harder to come by than a lot of other stats, and so having a convenient and easily accessible source of it is pretty huge.
We're also playing a game where Oni Savage is one of the most splashable classes, and Oni Savage's main problem is that its hit rates are not very high, while if you sing for a unit with Azura with Inspiring Song, that hit problem becomes a lot less of an issue, and they can really reliably hold forward and get a lot more damage in than they otherwise would, because when you multiply +6 hits over the course of an entire enemy phase when you're going up against like 8 units, you're probably going to increase your expected damage by a lot. Now, one more thing that really makes Azura so easy to use in any playthrough is that she requires basically no investment beyond the point where she gets Inspiring Song, because singing is such a high value action that you're probably just throwing if you put her in any other class. So she can just stay in Songstress, sing every turn, provide you with so much value, and not have to care about the reclassing shenanigans that Corrin and Ryoma have to do to get the most value out of them.
Yeah, the only reason why you would ever want to level up Azura past level 10 is for getting Voice of Peace, and Azura can't actually use that skill like too applicably because it is an aura skill where Azura needs to be within 2 spaces of a unit for it to work. However, what she can do is she can pass that down to her children. Azura is the only female unit other than female Corrin that actually has a kid of her own, being Shigure. She can pass that down to Shigure to have a flying aura bot, or she can pass it down to the other kid that she's going to get and have them use it. Again, it's not even close to as good as Inspiring Song, but it is still a very nice thing to have if you can get it.
Yeah, it's definitely a worthwhile skill, and it's almost always her best option to pass down if her kid is ever going to do combat, which they can be pretty decent at because she gives a lot of strength, speed, and skill inheritance. Them just getting 2 extra defense to make up for the lower defensive inheritance she would get is really nice.
So, I think we can all agree that Azura is amazing, but she can't do everything. Now, no matter how much you invest in Azura, her combat utility in Songstress is never going to be very good compared to some of your other options in this game, because her bulk will not really exist, and even if you go the crazy route of super overleveling her and changing her class to something more versatile like Kinshi Knights for combat, in the context of Birthright, Kinshi Knight Azura isn't really going to provide you with that much more value than having a Songstress Azura, because Birthright also gives you access to a unit that will do the exact same thing, but without taking away your ability to dance, and that is Reina. So spending your resources to make Azura good at combat generally is not worthwhile, and you really shouldn't be using Azura in any class other than Songstress. And one of the problems of the Songstress class is that it also has 5 movement. It does not promote, meaning that it doesn't get any more movement that other units would get halfway through the game. So she can struggle keeping up with your other units, especially once they get mounts. So it is often an ordeal to get Azura caught up to the front lines to get her to get high value sings. She does benefit from the mechanics of Fates with parrot movement, but it does require that little bit of extra efforts to get her where she needs to be.
And notably, an Azura who is paired up can't be sheltered. So if she wants to maintain her ability to dance multiple times, then she needs to do it unpaired. So her movement, while you can do anything with it, you can't do everything at once. She either gets high movement from pair up, or she gets multi-dancing. It's a little tricky to do both without investing a ton of actions.
And as a result of that, it's very common for Azura to be a recipient of boots. Boots are a very, very rare stat booster that give you +1 movement permanently, and this merely catches up Azura to 6 movement with the rest of your units. It doesn't give her a boost to 7 or 9 movement like other units would get. It just gives Azura the illusion that she promoted, which isn't always ideal. Normally you'll want boots on other units, like say you may want it on your main combat carry, or you may want it on like your more supportive units who are staying in the back lines while your units push further forwards. And the fact that it's always a decision of, do I give the boots to this unit that I want, or do I just give it to Azura? That's almost always the question, and it's a very annoying question to answer.
And notably, if you give Azura the boots in order to catch her movement up to everyone else's, it doesn't actually improve the total movement of your team. Whereas if you give it to someone with a mount, like a Paladin Ryoma or a Dark Knight Corrin, that unit can move 9 spaces, have Azura brought up to them, and then move 9 spaces again, which is something that Azura can't do. She can never apply the boots twice in one turn because she's the only unit who can't be danced.
Another issue with Azura is that if you want to get the sing action done multiple times in a turn, it's a real drain on your other unit's actions because it requires an action to shelter her. It requires a unit to transfer her away from the shelter user and get her to sing, and it requires another action to get Azura unpaired so that she can be sheltered again. You won't always want to be spending your actions in this way because sometimes it's more useful to have your other units do their own thing rather than putting all your eggs into supporting this one super unit that you want to plow forward. So you will have to think about how you're going to use Azura's actions before you start dancing 10 times in a turn.
An important thing to keep in mind while using Azura is her positioning too. This isn't as much of a problem as most other units, but Azura is probably always going to be your most frail unit on your entire deployment slots because of the fact that after level 10 or after level 25, you don't really care about Azura's experience gain anymore, which is going to cause her to become very under-leveled on top of her already poor bulk in HP and defense, which makes it so that some late-game enemies can just one-shot Azura if you're not careful with her positioning. And it gets even harder if you want to do big pushes where you're sending Azura forward with your units, because then you're going to have to worry about, okay, which enemies have 2 range, which ones are, like, what tiles are safe, where do I put each unit to make sure that Azura can get to where she needs to be while staying alive. It's kind of a hassle sometimes.
But in exchange, those pushes are only available to teams that have Azura deployed, so you're probably still going to get more value out of Azura if that's what you're going for with low turn counts.
Because Sing EXP is so bad for both regular EXP and support games, she frequently needs either a ton of shelters in order to level quickly, or she needs to do combat. So if you want to get her married or you want to get her to a useful level of bulk so that she can stay in enemy range, she either needs to be draining actions a ton, or she needs to be fighting enemies, and unlike in Conquest, Birthright enemies are a lot harder for Azura to survive and kill. So she does struggle in some regards there.
Azura does require the most effort to use at her fullest potential, because it requires you to have a mastery over all of this game's movement systems. But once you do, you can make your strategies more reliable, you can make your strategies take less turns, you can allow your units to grow a lot faster with their ability to act multiple times in a turn and get more value. She is very often going to be one of your most valuable units that you deploy in any given map. So over the course of an entire playthrough, the amount of value she provides, I'd argue, is higher than any other unit in the game. So while I personally think Azura is the best unit, I think we all understand that all 3 of these units are the best in the game, and putting any one of these three as your number one is a very reasonable choice.
As we've mentioned here in all of these sections, each unit does have their own pros and cons. There are obviously very, very good things to each one of these three units. There are very, very bad things to each one of these three units. That's just kind of how the way Fire Emblem goes. However, most of the bad things that each of these units face are all pretty negligible in comparison to almost every other unit in the game. The fact that they are just so unique in what they are able to do compared to the rest of the Fates cast is it almost feels like a fever dream. Sometimes it really does just make you think, what on earth were the devs cooking? Because these units can push so much further ahead of the others.
Yeah, all three of these are pretty clearly one of them is the best, because they're just so far ahead of the rest of the cast, all three of them. And, I mean, I'm just partial to Ryoma, because I think he comes at just the best cost of free, but there's very real arguments for all three of them, because they are just so strong.
I should note that while Fire Emblem Fates has a reputation of the Royals always being the best units in the game, that you should only deploy Royals, and they're the only ones worth investing in, I think for all three of us, there's a very large gap between the viability of these units and the viability of all the other Birthright Royals. It will be quite a while in each of our tier lists before we see the next Royal unit.
Yeah, there's quite a few units that I would say are just so much better than the Royals. It really is just these three that are just like so much better than every other unit in the game. While the Royals still can be very good, every unit is very good in this game if you want them to be. It's a lot easier for the non-Royals, for some of the non-Royals to actually pull ahead.
The other Royals, Inuka, Sakura, and Takumi, just sort of evenly slot themselves in around the tier list. They're pretty normal compared to other units. Like, the devs gave them a little bit of extra, but then not much more, so other just normally good units compare just fine to them. Whereas these three are just leagues ahead of everything else.
Just because these three units are amazing, that doesn't mean you should obsolete the use of every other unit, because Birthright is a game where every single unit in the game is extremely usable, on a wide variety of challenge runs, even on the highest difficulty. Just because these three units are amazing doesn't mean every other unit in the game is unusable, because you're probably going to have a lot more fun if you use a wide variety of units. And that's what really matters when you're playing this game in the current year.
The definite best way, I would say, to enjoy Birthright is to actually use the units that are worse off, because it makes for a fun challenge, really in any of the three Fates routes, actually. I just feel like this is the best way to enjoy the game, is to challenge yourself and use these quote-unquote worse units and, just give them a chance, see what you can do to make them work, and provide yourself a little bit of a challenge in how you tackle some of the maps in this game.
And the beautiful thing about Fates is that the units that are good depend on having a lot of support from other units on your team in order to reach their full potential. Corrin, for instance, relies heavily on getting supports from your other units on top of using her talent class. Ryoma really benefits from having good friendship and marriage options to really cover his weaknesses, and Azura is completely useless without another good unit for her to sing to. So making full use of these units will require you to use a wide variety of units, unless you decide that just pairing up Corrin and Ryoma and holding forward through the rest of the game is what you want to do. In which case, sure, but that's probably the most boring way to play the game.
Yeah, you could absolutely complete every map in the game by just having Corrin fly ahead holding Ryoma, sing to the pair with Azura, and then switch to Ryoma and win. But, there's not really much point in doing that, but it does show how ridiculous these three are, that they are really all you need to trivialize the whole game.
Alright, is there anything either of you want to add or plug at the end of this video?
Yeah, so I have my own channel where I do a lot of Fates content. I'm currently doing a run of Fire Emblem Birthright myself, where I'm doing a challenge run where I ban the pair-up mechanic in combat, which means no unit is able to make use of the guard gauge. On top of that, I'm also doing full recruitment. So obviously, I'm using Corrin, I'm using Azura, I'm using Ryoma. They are all trivializing the game for me, and if I didn't have them, I don't know what I'd do. Yeah, it's been a fun run. And then I also do some other Fates content every once in a while, just some miscellaneous things. So yeah, if you're definitely interested in that, go check it out.
I'll mention my channel as well. Yeah, I'm Septi on YouTube. Septistar is the full channel name. I don't have any projects in the works right now. Planning on doing some more at some point. But yeah, please check out my channel if you're interested and want to see more of me.
All right. Thank you guys for being on for over 2 hours. Let's go.
We beat the Jacob video.
No, you did not.
We didn't?
Nope.
How long was Jacob?
I remember the recording for Jacob was over 2.5 hours. That was pretty extreme.